Hello, my name is Brant Hunt. My channel is Discerning What is True, and today is the last day of the year. It is 12/31/2022. What I'm planning to do today is to continue on with the Information for Redemption Manual 4.5. A very valuable work, work to do with the history of what has happened in this country for the past 200 years. And what I'm going to do is start with the next particular section of this book called The Impact of the Bankruptcy. So I hope that you enjoy this. And more importantly, that you grasp the situation that you're in, knowing that basically you are not truly free and that you have an opportunity to be free and living back on the land. And the law of the sea needs to be destroyed because it makes us all slaves, you see. So here we go. Thank you for being here. So the impact of bankruptcy. So let's clarify the difference between real money of exchange that is backed by hard assets and a paper money of account as a substitute, that is a Federal Reserve note, are nothing more than promissory notes, you see, backed by the United States, that is in all caps, Treasury securities, that is T-bills. A promise to pay the debt to the Federal Reserve Bank. The Federal Reserve Bank allows the military federal government constructs to create debt that causes inflation through devaluation of the so-called currency. And may I add, at this point, folks, for the last 2 years, it's been that way. Inflation, people don't understand what causes inflation. And what inflation is simply is printing more paper dollars. It's that simple. And that devalues the money because there's more money into the financial sector than ever before. And so what happens with that is that it creates inflation. It isn't gasoline. It isn't food prices, folks. Food prices and gasoline all controlled by the money system. Get it in your head up here, please. Think. Because most people they blame things and they're not getting to the root of the problem. The root of the problem simply is that they're printing money enormously. And we probably not even only printing it, they're just putting it on a computer and saying we got this such and such. And this is what you have when you have private bankers controlling an economy, that is the United States, and almost all the rest of the world, folks. And the opposite thing that happened during the Depression was quite the opposite. Instead of having more paper money, what happened was they did it the other way and had less dollars. In fact, if you had a coin back there, it was far more valuable than that. But that's before they became the quote unquote paper dollars, you see. At that time, in the 1920s, you at least had a silver certificate or a gold certificate that is in money. And here's a really good way of understanding this clearly, what is going on. The price of gold at that time was roughly between $20 and $25 an ounce. It's in the 1920s during the Depression. In fact, what happened when the people gave their silver or the gold away, they got $25 for it. And then the U.S. government sold it. No, that's not, wait a minute, I'll refer that. Okay, it's $25. What has it been priced as early this year was over $2,000 an ounce. Did the gold go up or did the inflation go up? Do you know that the gold that is in the past, that is in 1971, was $35 an ounce? It'd have been nice if my parents had realized that and bought some of that in ounces. So from the 1920s to 1971, so roughly 50 years, over 50 years, gold went up $10. So there's no indicators of what we call inflation. Very little compared to those 50 years, compared to what's going on in the last 2 or 3 years. And so what it is now, it's over $1,800, but it's being also manipulated. Most people are unaware of that. And so what does that mean? It means simply is that the paper dollar is worth less and less and less. So if we're going 50 years from 1971, so that would be 2021. Think about it, because that's how simple it is. And most people can't figure it out because they never have thought about these things and never been involved in business, never understood what was involved with all this. They just never have. But anyway, we kind of got off the subject here somewhat. So the military federal government constructs to create debt that causes inflation through devaluation, the so-called currency. Inflation occurs, the word currency, you need to look that up in the Black's Law Dictionary. Inflation occurs whenever there is an increase in the supply of the so-called fiat money supply in the economy without a corresponding increase in the money of exchange, that is gold and silver or some other species, backing. Inflation is this is the key, folks, more than anything else. Inflation is an invisible form of taxation that irresponsible government inflicted on their subjects known as citizens. Get that in your head, folks. We have what we call not only Republicans and Democrats, that is, these two parties, they have destroyed this country. Do you understand that? You haven't destroyed it. They have. They have. They're the true enemy here, folks. So inflation is an invisible form of taxation because you have less and less money even to invest into the economy. In other words, if you want to buy a computer today, you don't have that money because simply it's more expensive for that computer to get it. Think about that. The Federal Reserve Bank has access to the unlimited supply of FRNs, that is Federal Reserve notes. The Federal Reserve Bank only pays for the printing costs of new FRNs. We also need to understand that there is a fundamental difference between paying and discharging a debt. To pay a debt, you must pay with value of substance, that is gold or silver or barter or a commodity. With FRNs, you can only discharge a debt. You cannot pay a debt with a debt currency system. You cannot service a debt with a currency that has no backing in value or substance. No contract in common law is value unless it invokes an exchange of good and valuable consideration. What does the federal and military government construct have to offer the Federal Reserve in payment of its debts? The next quote answers this question. This is from a gentleman named from the Congressional Record of March 9, 1933. The money will be worth 100 cents on the dollar because it is backed by the credit of the nation. It will represent a mortgage on all the homes and other property of all the people in the nation. Congressional Record. Stands out, doesn't it? And I doubt this is the United States, but I believe that almost other countries in the world have done the same thing. So we see now that the federal government has offered all of the private property and the people, that is the people, to its creditors. Yet what we're quote unquote. Look at the scheme here. Yet we're charged for property tax, which is not a lodial title. It once was a lodial title. It was yours. It wasn't for you to quote unquote to as a tenant, but as a owner. The government can also offer the labor of the people of the nation. Are you well of that? See the article on the Federal Reserve System to see how the IRS is used to collect money for the Federal Reserve. This quote is evident that the military social construct hypothecated all of the present and future properties, assets, and labors of their subjects to the Federal Reserve System. They've given it all to them. And most of you are not even aware of what's going on. Hypothecated to pledge property as security or collateral for a debt. Generally, there is no physical transfer of the pledged property to the lender, nor is the lender given title to the property, though he has a right to sell the pledged property upon default. That's Black's Law Dictionary, 5th edition. So the military social government construct has pledged or mortgaged our property as collateral to their creditors, the Federal Reserve. And most of you can't even wrap your head around what's going on. It's just unbelievable. But you need to really understand what is really going on. These days, today is a good old day, okay? Because in the future, it's going to be far worse. There's going to be massive inflation here. You won't be able to afford anything unless you're a thief, unless you're a government official. Okay? If you thought the only people who could mortgage property were the owners, you were correct. The implication is that the implication is that through some mechanism which will be the subject of future material on the subject, the military social government construct has taken over controlling interest in our property. If this is the case, it is a violation of the Fifth Amendment to the social contract known as the U.S. Constitution, not what social compact, contract, constitution, or otherwise are you party to, now ever, which would guarantee any right to state a claim of action on any agency liability to perform any in some fiduciary manner in relationship thereto. So continue to accept the delusion while the military construct continues to rape and pillage based upon your full faith and credit to continue to believe they're following to wit. Nor shall private property be taken for public use without just compensation. You may wonder how you got roped into paying someone else's debt. The answer can be found in the 14th Amendment. The validity of the public debt of the United States shall not be questioned. 14th Amendment, Section 4. After the passage of the 14th Amendment, everyone born in the so-called United States, that is in all caps, became a 14th Amendment federal citizen. As such, you are held liable for the public debt of the United States. Now, do you know why the South chose to leave the Union? Because of the debt, folks. They were not going to pay the debt. That's the real reason why they left the Union. They were not going to be we're not going to pay that. No way. That was in 1860. Back to 1859, all this began to happen. So this is why it's done again. But it's far worse now than it was then. And unfortunately, the South tried to secede, which was rightfully their right. They could have seceded because the states created the federal government, folks. So they could have actually said, we're no longer going to be a part of this whole agreement. We want to be our own way, do our own thing. I don't agree with what the South did in certain other aspects, but in reality, they had no choice here. But you have to also understand they were baited by this. There were paid provocateurs also going on to get the South out, so there would be a war, see? And that was by your quote-unquote English traders who were here. We were actually baiting the South to do that. So in reality, it was wrong in some aspects because they got baited into this whole thing. People lost their lands because of this. But continue. Prior to 1913, when the Federal Reserve Act was passed, most so-called Americans owned property and had allodial titles. There are no property taxes in this situation. When we buy property now, we are not given a allodial title. Instead, we are given a title deed, which is not fee simple absolute. That's F-E-E, simple absolute. To better understand, let's look at the definition of these terms. Allodial means free, not holding on any lord or superior, owned without obligation of vassal or fealty. That's the Black's Law Dictionary, 5th edition. Fee simple. Fee simple absolute is a state limited absolute to a man and his heirs and assignees forever without limitation or condition. An absolute or fee simple estate is one which the owner is entitled to the entire property, with unconditional power of disposition during his life, and descendants to his heirs and legal representations upon his death in the state. That is Black's Law Dictionary, 5th edition. Deed, a conveyance of reality. You hear that? A conveyance of reality. A writing signed by grantor whereby title to reality is transferred from one to another. That's from Black's Law Dictionary, the 5th edition. Again, you need to get a law dictionary, folks. Many terms you need to learn. Title deeds. Deeds which constitute or are the evidence of title to lands. Black's Law Dictionary, 5th edition. Emphasis added. From these definitions, it should be obvious that we do not have fee simple absolute title to our land. If we had allodial title without obligation, no one would have the authority to tax the land. They would also not have the right to sell the property if the taxes weren't paid. Yeah, you realize if you don't pay the taxes, you don't own it. You never have. You're just using it as a serf. But when the property was hypothecated, the military government took that authority. The title deed is evidence that a title does exist, but the question remains, who holds the title to the property? It would seem that the military government has taken control of our property, and then they leased it back to us for what is called property taxes. And you got to think to yourself simply, these people have all this money. What are they doing it? They're wasting it, you see. And the other thing simply is what they took here. They borrowed from what was the collateral, that is the land, in order to back up their system. In return for turning over all the property in the so-called military social contract known as the U.S., the Federal Reserve Bank agreed to extend the federal military social contract all the credit as money substitute if needed. Like any other debtor, their federal military government construct had to assign collateral and security to their creditors as a condition of the loan. Since their federal military government construct didn't have any assets, they assigned the private property of their economic slaves, the so-called the so-called United States in all caps citizens as collateral against the unpayable federal military debt. They also pledged the unincorporated federal military territories, national parks, and forests as collateral against the federal military debt too. Do you know that? You should be boiling mad about all this shit. You know that? Stop being complacent. Stop being fearful. For evidence of this, see the United Nations plaques in most of the major so-called national parks. Yes, this happened about 20 years ago. Maybe it's a little bit more than that. I think it happened during the Clinton administration. It was pledged as collateral for the debt. You might say, I don't feel like an economic slave. If not, then why are most who call themselves Americans mortgaged to the hilt and have little or no assets after all debts and liabilities have been paid? Why does it feel like you are working harder and harder and getting less and less? Evidence of your economic slavery is the fact that you pay Social Security taxes and income taxes. Yeah, there are many people today, that are working 2 to 3 jobs, and they're not making the money they were before. Plus, the inflation, the money is nowhere going where it's going. It's nowhere going to what it used to pay for in the past. I can remember as a little boy that bananas were 9 cents a pound. 9 cents a pound. How much are they now? They're roughly almost 50%. They're almost 60 cents now. Okay. Remember that we said the federal military government construct could also pledge the labor of the citizens. The federal military government construct gets the benefits of your labor in the form of so-called federal employment income tax. What are they doing with all this money, folks? What are they doing with it? Oh, it's going to a private bankers is what it's going to. You couldn't do this if there was a treasury involved here, folks. The people would be uproared about it. Well, maybe they would be. What you may not know is that the federal military government construct does not have any constitutional authority to tax your wages. So the income tax is voluntary, which is true. You volunteer to pay off the public debt when you apply for a Social Security number and then give it to your employer when you file a W-4 form. If you don't believe it, find a canceled check that you had written to the IRS, turn it over, and on the back, you will see that the check was endorsed for deposit in a Federal Reserve account. So your check to pay your income tax was deposited into a Federal Reserve, a private bank, who is the active physical agent of the creditor for the Crown of England as the exchequer of the Vatican to service the federal military government construct in unpayable debts. In summary, the federal military government construct is bankrupt. The Federal Reserve bankers are the physical agent for the creditors to the federal military government construct. All of your property and labor have been pledged to pay the debts of the federal military government construct. As a United States citizen, that is all caps the United States, you are held liable for the so-called military public account debt and the service agent of the physical agent, Federal Reserve System. known as the Internal Revenue Service, the IRS, is the collection agency for the Federal Reserve System. Did you hear that? Is the collection agency for the Federal Reserve System. I'm spelling truth to you folks here. This is the most important information that you can value this. I'm sharing total truth to you, what they're doing to you, and you're becoming poorer and poorer. Now I have attempted to keep this as simple as possible so as to reach those still in the matrix, so to speak. You can be set free from this system of control, but you must first want to be free. The only way that you have to emerge into any other political status freely determined by a people is according to the international public order, which constitutes modes of implementing the right of self-determination by the people recognized by the principles of international law, otherwise known as the law of nations and or the law between nations, adopted to keep the peace within the framework of differences which may or may not exist between such jurisdictions, however known, established by those who have emerged accordingly for the benefit of their safety, liberty, and pursuit of happiness, by constituting a social compact for these benefits by which other jurisdictions may know how to treat with such compact, according to the international public order. This has existed for a millennium to allow the exchange of intercourse that is / commerce between such compacts for the benefit of those who have pledged to each other their lives, their fortunes, their sacred honor, to establish their credibility within the international public order as a bond by which other jurisdictions may know the condition of mind of such social compact when treating with them, when establishing treaties for whatever purpose. So I'm going to read to you now information here about the 73rd Congress, Session 1, CHS 46-48, June 3rd, 5, 1933. This is Chapter 48. Joint Resolution. This is from what they have done. To assume uniform value to the coins and currency of the United States, whereas the holdings of or dealing in gold affect the public interest and are therefore subject to proper regulation and restrictions, and whereas the existing commercy has disclosed that a provisions of obligation which purport to give the obligee a right to require payment in gold or a particular kind of coin or currency in the United States, or in an amount in money of the United States measured thereby, obstruct the power of the Congress to regulate the value of money of the United States and are inconsistent with the declared policy of the Congress to maintain at all times the equal power of every dollar, coin, or issued by the United States in the markets and in the payment of debts. Now, therefore, be it resolved by the Senate and House of Representatives of the United States of America and Congress assembled that every provision contained in or made with respect to any obligation which purports to give the obligee a right to require payment in gold or a particular kind of coin of currency or any amount in money of the United States measured thereby is declared to be against public policy. No longer public law here, folks, but public policy. The graying of the lines, the change here taking place during the 1930s under the traitor of Franklin Delano Roosevelt and others, not just him, it's others that went along with this too, especially Congress. And no such provision shall be contained in or made with respect to any obligation hereafter incurred. Here, every obligation heretofore or hereafter incurred, whether or not any such provision is contained therein or made with respect thereto, shall be discharged upon payment, dollar for dollar, in any coin or currency, which at the time of payment is legal tender for public and private debts. Any such provision contained in any law authorizing obligations to be issued by or under the authority of the United States is hereby repealed. But the repeal of any such provision shall not invalidate any other provisions of authority contained in such law. B. As used in this resolution, the term obligation means an obligation that is including every obligation of and to the United States, accepting currency, payable in money of the United States, and the term coin or currency means coin or currency of the United States, including Federal Reserve notes and circulating notes of Federal Reserve banks and national bank associations. Section 2. The last sentences of paragraph 1 of subsection B of Section 43 of the Act, entitled "An Act to relieve the existing national economic emergency by increasing agricultural purchasing power, to raise revenue for extraordinary expenses incurred by reasons of such emergency, to provide emergency relief with respect to agricultural indebtedness, to provide for the orderly liquidation of joint stock land banks." So they're eliminating something here. They're liquidating the joint stock land banks, and for the other purposes approved May 12, 1933, is amended to read as follows. All coins and currency of the United States, including the Federal Reserve notes and circulating notes of the Federal Reserve Bank and National Bank Associations, heretofore or to hereafter, coin or issue shall be legal tender for all debts, public and private, public charges, taxes, duties, and dues, except that gold coins, when for the single piece, shall be legal tender only as valuation in proportion to their actual weight. So that gives you an idea of what they did. This was approved June 5th, 1933. Again, all these emergency things are done on purpose, folks. It's to scare the public. They do this constantly in the past, done it over and over. Continue. The emergency powers fraud. The Republican Party of Texas Executive Committee voted unanimously on June 17, 1995, to recommend rescinding the Emergency Banking and Relief Act of March 9, 1933. The Libertarian Party should do the same. Given the many years that the Republican presidents had the opportunity to rescind their emergency powers and didn't. That's right. One of the first things that a president does when he comes in office is he claims to be the commander-in-chief. And the commander-in-chief is affecting, you have the president cap. Okay, so you take that cap off, and that cap now becomes the emergency powers. So he puts that cap on. And so he's not even considered the president, so to speak. He's now the commander-in-chief, because we're living under a military government. Okay. So no Republican or Democrats done this. Okay, I have little or no faith in the Republicans and Democrats within their military emergency powers and restore the Constitution to full force as it was originally established according to the principles of international public order. So what's going on here? Ever since after the Civil War, basically starting in 1870s, maybe even before then, 1871, we've been living under martial law. Ever since then. And I'm not talking about M-A-R-S-H-A-L-L. I'm talking about M-A-R-T-I-A-L. So the cap of you we think is he's the president is actually, he's not the president. He's now the commander-in-chief because it's a military government. Our best hope is for their military social contract to declare a restatement of their social compact within the framework of international public order, especially respectively to the posterity to which such compact was established. Also, for those who wish to emerge into a position of political status according to the principles of international public order, and to do so in the interest of peace within the international public order for our own safety, liberty, and pursuit of happiness by declaring our pledge to each other in a social compact to establish our own credibility while what each others may treat with us. For those of you unaware of the history of emergency powers, I included here a monogram on the subject. In 1917, the Trading with the Enemy Act 5050 USC Appendix was passed. It allowed the so-called presidents to prohibit, restrict, license, or regulate any transaction by citizens or corporations of the enemy countries operating within the U.S. during World War I. Conveniently, it was never revoked, even though the war emergencies ended. So this was a provocation of what we would call, oh, we're doing this because simply as we were at war. But in reality, simply was never rescinded. On March 24th, 1918, the Act was amended and its scope greatly expanded by adding hoarding, melting to the description of foreign exchange by deleting the word such from 2 places in. And he may require any, used to be say such, no longer, any person engaged in transactions. So it used to be saying, and he may require any such person engaged in any such transaction. They dropped the word such in it. It's in March 24th, 1918. In the early 1920s, the Federal Reserve loose money policy encouraged a lot of people, especially farmers, to overextend themselves. When the Federal Reserve contracted the money supply during the late 20s, it initially an economic collapse that was sustained and deepened by the Smoot, S-M-O-O-T, as Hawley, H-A-W-L-E-Y, tariff of 1930, which raised rates as high as 49%, purportedly to act as a price support for American farmers. Their president, that is Mr. Herbert Hoover, inventions helped to create a worldwide recession. This is why you heard during that time period that we call Hoovervilles, because towns became, under Hoover, poor. On March 9, 1933, their president, Mr. Franklin Delano Roosevelt, issued Proclamation 2039 under the authority of the Trading with the Enemy Act. That is, the president may prohibit, by means of license or otherwise, the export or hoarding of gold or silver coin, and cease redeeming the legal tender bills of credit for gold coin, lawful money. So what happened simply is that when a person had these dollar certificates, had silver certificates and gold certificates on their money, at that point, they can no longer turn them in to get gold coins. What a shambles here, folks. On March 9, also 1933, their president, Mr. FDR, convened the 10th Federal Congress in special session. This military Congress declared a state of emergency, H.R. 1491, number 1, and rubber stamp ex post facto proclamation granted their president, Mr. FDR, the same powers he would have in time of war. So we're not at war here, folks, okay? We're not at war until 8 years later, okay? But he's given the powers as though he is at war. Their Congress passed the Emergency Banking Act without reading or debating it, just like they passed, what's it called? Done at night during the 2001 thing, Homeland Security stuff. That was all done at night, folks, all at night. And they didn't even bother to read it. In fact, some of them didn't even have the information. And yet, they didn't vote no against it, did they? These people are truly criminals. Truly criminals. But they did it at night, too, folks. Just like they did the whole thing with Mr. Wilson, setting up this whole banking system. They worked all night. Have you ever seen Congress work that hard in your life? They both got together, that is the House, 2 bills, and put them together and worked on it feverishly. And then they put it in his hands on December 23rd, Wilson, and he signed it immediately. In fact, it actually was given to Colonel Mandel House first to make sure it was okay. Then they gave it to Wilson. So who really was running the country? Think about it. Kind of got off subject here, but anyway, you need to know these things I'm sharing to you because they're important. Their Congress, that is, passed the Emergency Banking Act without reading or debating it. Some say a newspaper was put into the hopper to represent the bill, which was still being written, effectively suspending any remaining effect of the so-called social compact of the U.S. Constitution and imposing martial law of each and every people under the provisions of Article 1, Section 9, Clause 2. Once an emergency is declared, the common law and constitutional guarantees are abolished, and all people fall under the absolute will of the military social government contract. Public military policy. The military word is in all caps. Before 1933, that had statutes at large, that is federal military legislation, that is public policy, which used to be public law. Their president became commander-in-chief, IPSO, ipso facto, in effect, a non-constitutional dictator, acting under the law of necessity, the law of war. The 10th, that is the military Congress, passed without debate Bank Compensation Act, amending Section 5, subsection B of the Trading with the Enemy Act to accommodate Proclamation 2039. The functional result of the changes. During time of war, during any other period of national emergency declared by the president may, through any agency that he may designate, investigate, regulate, or prohibit it under such rules and regulations as he may prescribe. That's dictatorship, folks. By means of license or otherwise any transaction defined by the president, by any person within the United States or any place subject to the jurisdiction thereof. And the president may require any persons engaged in the transaction referred to in this subdivision to furnish under oath complete information relative thereto, including the production of any book of account, contracts, letters, or other papers in connection therewith in the custody or control of such persons, either before or after such transaction is completed. This is unbelievable. You don't live in the land of free, folks. Stop singing the Star Spangled Banner. It's not true anymore. We don't live in the land of brave. We don't. Immediately thereafter, their president, their president, FDR, issued Proclamation 2040 under the authority of the amended Trading with the Enemy Act. In view of such continual national emergency, all terms and provisions of said proclamation of March 6, 1933 are in full force and in effect until further proclamation by the president. 48 Statute 1691. The New Deal by these poker sharks, as they say, was not to be temporary. People and their property became as chattels for their unlimited obligations of their military social construct known as the United States. The so-called President FDR interventions created massive dependency on the federal military government construct and converted a deep recession into a long-lasting worldwide depression, still controlling many people in so-called first, second, and third world nations in bankruptcy, creating fertile ground for people like Hitler, the Democratic Party, the Republican Party, or any party deemed to continue this tradition, planetary involuntary slavery by and through misrepresentation fostered upon the sovereign people of earth, other subjection for debts to which we, the sovereign people of earth, have never been given full disclosure of, with any clear understanding, consent, or knowledge by their so-called public schooling centers of educational learning as to how such fraud operates over the sovereign people of earth and their posterity were perpetually within the present day social compact or constructs, nor how such fraud is enforced by powers operating via international military social constructs, brackets with UN Security Council, to keep each and every living soul in subjection. This is clearly a breach of international public order in terms of peace, safety, and pursuit of happiness, declared by each and every international intergovernmental organization or any international non-government organization, the NGOs, you see, existing upon planet Earth. The only way to keep or restore peace on a universal or planetary scale for each and every sovereign people of Earth on otherwise it is to teach each and every walk of life how to peacefully emerge into an international public order for their own safety, liberty, and happiness according to their own belief structure, by establishing their own social compact by which other such compacts or constructs may know how to treat with such compacts or constructs in a peaceful manner, denying none a voice and passing no laws without unanimous consent. In this way, each and every social compact shall maintain its reason, organic principles intact, and such resources as may be necessary to secure the people throughout each and every compact or planetary scale or otherwise. And peace shall be the fruit of such labor of education to benefit all walks of life equally, denying none and giving to all. Well, back to the grind, they say. The Act, now 50 USC, capitals all USC, .1622, is still in full force and effect. It refers to as the source of authority for much of the public law found in the United States Code. Every president since Mr. FDR has declared or redeclared a national emergency to retain their martial law powers. That's correct, very much so. An amendment to the Emergency Powers Act was passed in 1977 and enacted in 1979. This amendment required the declaration be done annually. So it wasn't just because he came in the president became for 4 years. Now he did it every year. But that didn't dissuade their so-called presidents like clockwork. They each declared or extended another bogus national emergency. Like just recently about they're running out of money again. The government can't pay, so we're going to have to print more money. You notice that? It's becoming more and more regular now. It used to be done maybe every year or every 2 to 3 years. But now I think it's been done the last 4 or 5 times this year. It's just a continuum mercy. The threats posed to the so-called U.S. by Grenada, Panama, and Haiti international terrorism justified a few of the more recent of a long line of national mercy frauds here, and one declared in the 90s. This is the White House, Office of the Press Secretary. This was for immediate release on November 9, 1995. Continuation of emergency regarding weapons of mass destruction. I'm sorry, this is ridiculous what's going on here, how this has been going on. On November 14, 1994, by Executive Order number 12938, I declare national emergency with respect to the unusual and extravagant threat to national security, foreign policy, and economy of the United States posed by proliferation of nuclear, biological, and chemical weapons. Their word would be weapons of mass destruction, and the means of delivering such weapons, because the proliferation of weapons of mass destruction and the means of delivering them continue to pose an unusual and extravagant threat to the national security, foreign policy, and the economy of the United States. The national emergency declared on November 14, 1994, must continue in effect beyond November 14, 1995. So, in other words, it's a year in advance. Well, that's through the whole year, I should say. Therefore, in accordance with Section 202D of the National Emergency Act, 50 U.S.C. 1622, I am continually the national emergency declared in Executive Order number 12938. This notice shall be published in the Federal Register and transmitted to the Congress. This was under William Jefferson Clinton. So let's go to another section here. And I've done some things with this also with the book, that brilliant book by Eustace Mullins, The Secrets of the Federal Reserve. This is the book here. I think you can still get it for $25. That's a steal, folks. Seriously. 7 men representing an estimated 1/4 of the total wealth of the entire world met in secrecy on the Jekyll Island in Georgia. Through their deliberations, the Federal Reserve was conceived. Its purpose would be to protect its members from competition and ensure their monopoly of the money supply. So they all work together here. These money grant giants developed the strategy. I mean, think about it. This is 1/4 of the 25% of the total wealth in the 1912 or 1911. All in secrecy, too. Therefore, these money giants developed the strategy needed to convince both Congress and the public that this privatized cartel was actually an agency of the United States government, when it wasn't, never was. That's what the Federal Reserve, that's why they used the name Federal Reserve System, because everybody thinks, oh, when it has federal in front of it, it means it's to do with the government. No, it's private bankers. Get that in your head, folks. They blast you all the time in the media, these things, and so you just accept it. Time not to accept it now. Let's grow up. Be strong men here and stand up against evil. The men themselves already had vast power of their own. It's not surprising that their ploy for even more was successful. Note the players and credentials. And I've gone through this. Is Nelson W. Aldrich, which was the Republican whip in the Senate, chairman of the National Monetary Commission, spent much of money going over to Europe, and actually never published anything of any when he did all this. And it wasn't just him; it was all other congressmen. Certain congressmen went with him. Abraham Platt, that's Piatt, P-I-A-T-T, Andrew, Assistant Secretary of the United States Treasury. Frank A. Vanderlip, President of National City Bank of New York, the most powerful of the banks at that time, represented William Rockefeller and the international investment banking house of Coombe, Lowe and Company. Henry P. Davison, the senior partner of J.P. Morgan. Charles D. Norton, president of J.P. Morgan, First National Bank of New York. Benjamin Strong, head of J.P. Morgan's Bankers Trust Company. And the last, the most important person, Paul M. Warburg, a partner in Coombe, K-U-H-N, Loeb and Company, a representative of the Rothschild banking dynasty in England and France, and brother to Max Warburg, who was head of the Warburg Banking Consortium in Germany and the Netherlands. In the February 9, 1935 issue of the Saturday Evening Post, the article appeared written by Frank Vanderlip. In it, he said, Despite my views about the value to society of greater publicity for the affairs of corporations, there was an occasion near the close of 1910 when I was as secretive, indeed as futile, as any conspirator. Do not feel it is in any exaggeration to speak of it, our secret expedition in Jekyll Island. So what he's doing is, this is 20 years after the act, after he's been there. So he's actually going to spill some beans here a little bit, okay? At the occasion of the actual conception of what eventually became the Federal Reserve System, we were told to leave our last names behind us. We were told further that we should avoid dining together on the night of our departure. That is, they went by railroad. And they got special names. Once aboard the private car, we began to observe the taboo that had been fixed on last names. We addressed one another as Ben, Paul, Nelson, Abe, and I. Adopt the even deeper disguises, abandoning our first names, or the theory that we were already right. We became Wilbur, and I became Orville. And after these two aviation pioneers, the Wright brothers, that is, the servants and train crew may have known the identities of one or two of them, but they did not know all of them. It was the names of all printed together that would have made any mysterious journey significant in Washington, Wall Street, and even in London. Discovery we knew simply must not happen, or else all our time and efforts would be wasted. So this is all done in secret. If it were to be exposed publicly that our particular group had gotten together and written a banking bill, that bill would have no chance whatsoever of passage by Congress. As with all cartels, what is a cartel? Well, as a cartel is like during the war, World War II, they all work together to say the oil companies, which they did do this. So they're no longer in competition, that is, so to speak. So they work together, and there's only, let's just say four oil companies. And so what a cartel does is simply is that they have what I call certain regional strengths. In other words, let's just say like Exxon has control of the West Coast, and another oil company, maybe Phillips 66 or something, has control of all the Midwest. And in the South, there's another company, maybe Shell Oil. And then in the very Northeast, there is, BP, British Petroleum. And all of them work in agreement in a way that there is no lower or higher prices. So if the gas is going to be $1, it all is $1 all over. You see? So they work in a cartel. They're not competing against one another anymore. They're working in a cartel. That's how a cartel works. You see? So what a meaning is simply is there's no competition, and everybody's protected. So no one loses or whatever. This is what I'm saying regionally. It doesn't have to be regional. It can be anywhere, such and such. It had to be created by legislation sustained by the powers of government under the deception of protecting the consumer. As John Kenneth Galbraith explained it, it was that his Senator Aldrich thought to outflank the opposition by having not one central bank, but many, and the word bank would itself be avoided. Galbraith said, Warburg has with some justice been called the father of the system. Yeah, he is the father. He's the one who did it all, folks. They had some communications, talks back and forth, supposedly, but he's the one who guided this whole thing and steered it. Professor Edwin Stiglman, a member of the international banking family of J&W Stiglman and head of the Department of Economics at Columbia University, writes that in its fundamental features, the Federal Reserve Act is the work of Mr. Warburg more than any other man in the country. Of course it is, by far. Another brother, that is Max Warburg, was the financial advisor of the Kaiser and became director of the Reichsbank in Germany. This was, of course, a central bank also. It was one of the cartel models used in the construction of the Federal Reserve System. That's what he says. Actually, Paul Warburg says he's a banking system. He tells he comes from Germany. All this, he's very straightforward. He knows the banking, how it works in and out, whatever they do. The Reichsbank, incidentally, a few years later, would create the massive hyperinflation that occurred in Germany, wiping out the middle class and the entire German economy as well, just like they're doing today. Just like they're doing today. This is the stories, if your grandmother or someone told you, that the German people got paid, workers at the mills, plants, whatever, got paid for 4 hours of work from 8 to 12. From 12 to 1, they would go to the bank and then buy whatever they need to get. And then they'll go back to work at 1 o'clock to 5 o'clock, and the banks, such and such, would then do it again because the inflation was happening so rapidly that actually the prices were being changed immediately over each day. And people didn't have anything except what they worked for and then spent it in order to get what they needed and then spend it again. That's why you heard that they had these German Dutch marks are in wheelbarrows. They're absolutely worthless. Same thing happened in Zimbabwe. Far worse than Zimbabwe was even Germany. In fact, they took actually under that particular country in Africa, which used to be Rhodesia, which was one time the flour and the enormous farming and dairy in there, because many of them were farmers and dairies. That was all destroyed after the war. It became another country under dictatorship. So anyway, kind of got off subject here. A. Barton Helpern of Chase National Bank was even more candid. He said, the measure recognizes and adopts the principle of the central bank. Indeed, if all works out as the sponsors of the law hope, it will make all incorporated banks together joint owners of central dominating power. Incorporated. Interesting. And that is about as good a definition of a cartel as one is like to define. Correct. Anthony Sutton, another brilliant man out there. If you get his books, get them. Just hit one of his books. He's the former research fellow at the Hoover Institute for War, Revolution, and Peace. Also professor of economics at Cal State University in Los Angeles, probably somewhat deeper analyst. He does this. One thing I want to share about this simply is the central banks with them taking over here in the United States and already in Germany, already destroyed the Russian government. What they did, they created two enemies. And that was the Soviet Union and Germany. And so he has the Wall Street, the Bolshevik Revolution, and also the rise of Hitler. All were financed by a lot of it American money, because that's what they did. They got the real gold and silver and used it and gave us the paper money. Anthony Sutton, research follower at Hoover Institute for War. Warburg's revolutionary plan to get American society to go to work for Wall Street was astonishingly simple. Even today, academic theoreticians cover their blackboards with meaningless equations, and general public struggles in bewildered confusion with inflation and the coming credit collapse, while the quite simple explanation of the problem goes unacknowledged and almost completely non-understood. The Federal Reserve System is a legal private monopoly of the money supply, operated for the benefit of the few under the guise of protecting and promoting the public interest. Their public interest is to create world government. So that's the whole idea. And to even make it worse for us as people to survive. The real significance of the journey of Jekyll Island and his creature that was hatched there was inadvertently summarized by the words of Paul Warburg, a admiring biographer, that is Harold Kellogg. Paul M. Warburg is probably the mildest mannered man that ever personally conducted a revolution. It was a bloodless revolution. He did not attempt to rouse the populace to arms. He stepped forward, armed simply with an idea, and he conquered. That's the amazing thing. A shy, sensitive man, he imposed his ideas on a nation of 100 million people. The attendants to Jekyll Island, however, were comparatively speaking mere choir boys to the grand family of international bankers compared to Rothschild and his 5 sons. The Rothschild family built a banking empire throughout Europe by staging wars and manipulating economics. The few who can understand the system, that is check, money, and credits, will either be so interested in its profits. This is a quote. It's a quote now, listen. The few who can understand the system, the check, money, and credits, will either be so interested in its profits are so dependent on its favors that there will be no opposition from that class. While on the other hand, the great body of the people mentally incapable, that's what they're telling you. Listen, by you not doing anything and pursuing the truth, this is what you're doing. Mentally incapable of comprehending the tremendous advantages that capital derives from the system will bear its burdens without complaint, perhaps without even suspecting that the system is inimical to their interests. Isn't that an amazing statement, folks? Isn't that amazing? The statement here. So let's continue on. The Rothschild Brothers of London. In this essay, we will see how the Federal Reserve was created. Let's see how much time I've got here. I don't want to. Yeah, maybe I should cut it off here. It's about an hour long, and I'll start it again because I need a break. I need to eat something real quick, and then we'll start it again today. What we're going to start with next is the Rothschild Brothers of London, and we'll continue on. Again, this is from the Redemption Manual 4.5. If you want to buy that book, you can buy it. You can purchase that book from eBay. And let me see. I'll give you an idea right quick here. Mark it off. Yeah, it's not cheap. The Redemption 4.5 is approximately, there are three sellers here. There's one for $179, our best offer is free shipping. Another one is in Redemption Manual 4.5, again, $169, our best offer, free shipping, and $179, our best offer. There's three people I see here selling that particular manual if you want to get it in book form. If not, you can actually get it in PDF file on the PDF drive. You can go to that particular search, not search, but book service, and type in that book and you can download it on your computer and read it. So anyway, just thought I'd recommend that for you guys. I'll be back in probably 30 minutes or 45 minutes here. Again, we'll continue on, and just simply is so valuable for you to understand. But what I want to say, one thing is simply is the unbelievable comments here that there will be no opposition from that class. While on the other hand, the great body of people mentally incapable of comprehending the tremendous advantages that capital derives from the system will bear its burdens without complaint, and perhaps without even suspecting that the system is actually against their interests. That's what they think of you. Now you need to say, no, I'm not going to be one of those people. I'm going to learn, and I'm going to stand against the system. Okay, we'll be back in about 30 to 45 minutes, and we'll continue on with this particular book I'm sharing. Thank you for being here. Okay, take care.